What's going to go over all of it?
All right, so last time we started talking about phylum Chordata,
Oh boy.
which is the phylum most of you belong to. There's a couple I'm not sure about, but most of you belong to phylum Chordata.
I'm used to it by now.
Yeah.
So.
Oftentimes we call things in phylum Chordata vertebrates, but there are a few things in this phylum that don't have a backbone. So they're in phylum Chordata, but they're not vertebrates. But these things you see on the screen are characteristics that all vertebrates have. They may not have them their whole life, but at some point in time or other during their life, they have these things. For example, they all, mostly during embryonic development, have this thing called a notochord. And in most vertebrates, most things in phylum Chordata, that notochord goes away and is replaced by the disc between your vertebrae, between your the little disc in your backbone. All things in phylum Chordata at some point in time or other have gill slits along their pharynx, pharyngeal gill slits. In most non-fish chordates, those go away before you're born. Everything in phylum Chordata at some time or other has the post-anal tail. And again, in some things, that goes away. In others, it doesn't. Bilateral symmetry. Most chordates keep that their whole life. There are a few exceptions to that. But that means you've got two sides that are essentially mirror images of each other. And also, chordates are deuterostomes, which means during embryonic development, the little blastopore, the opening into the ball of cells, becomes the anus. It means mouth second. And remember that deuterostomes are only chordates, and what other group? What other phylum? Chordates, which are us, and what other phylum?
What other phylum?
Are the deuterostomes.
Oh, not there yet?
Nope. Echinoderms, like starfish and stuff. And remember that what they have in common is that the anus forms from that blastopore, and that the cleavage patterns early in embryonic development are indeterminate, which means your cells stay stem cells for a long time before they specialize. All right. So we talked too about a little bit about vertebrates, so specifically the vertebrates. Because remember, there are two groups of animals. Let me back up and talk about them for a second. That are chordates but not vertebrates. And one of those is the lancet, which sort of looks like almost like a little eel or something. It burrows the back end of its ground, or its body rather, into the sand, lives in the water, and it essentially filter feeds. Stays still. It never has a backbone. It keeps that little notochord its whole life. It has gill slits. It has all those characteristics. No backbone. And then another one is the tunicate, which looks like a sponge as an adult and is not really at all like vertebrates as an adult. But as a larva, this tunicate looks very much like the lancet. And it changes. It goes through like a metamorphosis pattern where it looks more like a sponge as an adult. So you wouldn't think that would be related to us at all. But if you check the genes, you check the embryonic development patterns, it is related pretty closely to the vertebrates. All right, we talked about all these things are characteristics of vertebrate chordates, large and active, high degree of cephalization. What do we say that meant?
Sense organs in the head.
Sense organs in the head. Cephalo means head. Axial endoskeleton that grows with us, that's pretty important. Two pairs of appendages, arms and legs. Disc between our vertebrae to keep the bones from rubbing against each other. Really good respiratory system. Good circulatory system. Digestive system and nervous system. We have all those things. What we're going to try to focus on today, though, is this tree. Phylogenetic tree of chordates. Now remember that in these phylogenetic trees, what's implied to be the bottom left of the tree? The most primitive thing. And the more you go up and to the right, the more advanced and newer in terms of evolution, right? And what do these little white boxes along the lines represent?
The evolutionary.
Yeah, they're what we call derived traits, derived characteristics. And essentially how'd they come to be?
Mutation.
It came about as a mutation, and it turned out to be a good mutation. And what happens if a mutation allows you to live and reproduce better than your other peers? You reproduce more than your peers do, and you become something new. And that's what happened here. So the lancets and the tunicates are the first two branches of phylum Chordata. Today we're going to try to get through most of the rest of these branches, and we'll start with fish. Fish are the first vertebrates. There's three groups of fish that we'll mention. There's Agnatha, and like we said before, anytime you see the G and the N and the A and the T and the H together, G-N-A-T-H, that means jaws. So Agnatha means no jaws. Just fish without jaws. And then we have jaws, sharks. And then we have regular old bony fish, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the first class we'll talk about, and it's actually, sometimes it's divided up into separate classes. We're going to call everything on this page, we're going to call them all as members of Agnatha. Which again means no jaws. Two main examples, the hagfish and the lamprey. Neither have jaws. Hagfish are thought to be the first true fish to live. I've got a picture of a lamprey. Hagfish look similar. The hagfish are bottom dwellers. They live on bottoms, usually of bodies of fresh water. They filter feed. Sometimes they scavenge. The lampreys are a little cooler. They too don't have jaws. They do have a notochord, support rod in their back, but it's surrounded by cartilage, so it's almost like a backbone. They're usually considered the first vertebrates. They, unlike the hagfish, are usually parasites. They have this sucker-like mouth with teeth, and they will suck onto another fish or another vertebrate, and they're almost like vampire fish, sucking blood, sucking guts, whatever they can get. This is what a lamprey looks like.
Oh, it's cute.
Not really. But you can see the gill slits, sucker-like mouth. There's some teeth, nice teeth in there. Yeah. All right, the rest of the fish, other than the agnathans, are sometimes called gnathostomes. And that literally means mouth with jaws. Remember that scientists have discovered this group of genes called the HOX genes. They usually call them HOX genes. And these are the genes that code for your basic body structure in all the vertebrates. They're the basic, here's where this piece goes, and this piece goes here, and this piece goes here, and this piece goes here. So they're coding for like your body parts and where they go, HOX genes. They think that jaws came about as a mutation in the genes that originally coded for gill slits. So there was some mutation in the gill slit genes, and that led to the first jaws. Well, you have the gill slits during embryonic development, and they transform into your jaws over time.
But wait, if the gills transform into jaws...
Not the gills. Not the gills. Slits.
Oh, gills.
Maybe not all the slits. Maybe only certain ones. So like you saw, that lamprey had lots and lots of gill slits, whereas a shark only has a few. So it could be different things going on there. But the first jawed fish are in a class called chondrichthyes, which literally means cartilage fish. And these are your sharks in your race. Yeah.
So chondrichthyes are a class of gnathostomes?
Yes. The only bones in their body are their teeth. Everything else is made out of cartilage. And we said before, the advantage of that is what? It's lighter, which means they can move how? Faster. Disadvantage is it's easier to break. It's not as strong as bone. But if you're living in the water, is that all that important? No, because what does the water do?
It supports you.
It supports most of your body weight, so you don't really need a strong skeleton if you're in the water. It's not necessary. Sharks also have this really thick skin. It's almost like leather. but it's like scaly leather. That's important because they're living in the ocean, and what is water trying to do in terms of get out? So they need something to keep it in, which is what the thick, scaly skin is about. That's what desiccation means, right? Drying out.
So, got a question for you. When there's thin wrinkles, like when it's been in the water for a while, is that like the water? Like
That's water going in.
It's going in?
Because there's only certain parts of your body that will allow the water to come through, and those parts swell up, and the other parts don't. So it looks like it's wrinkled, but really it's swollen.
Just increase that.
Yep. So we know that the things in chondrichthyes, the sharks and the rays, have pretty good vision, really well-developed sense of olfaction, which is smell. They've got a line that runs down like the midline of the body called the lateral line, which acts like an ear almost. It also picks up vibrations. And remember that fish and amphibians and even birds have this pouch at the end of their digestive system called the cloaca. And this is what the large intestine dumps into. But it's also what the urinary system and the reproductive system all dump into. And then all that stuff comes out the same hole. That's kind of gross. So urinary, digestive, and reproductive fluids all come out the same place in most fish, birds, and amphibians.
So do they get like infections and stuff from that?
You'd think, but I've never heard that much about it, but you would think they would. But anyway, chondrichthyes, if you ever see ichthyo or ichthyes, that means fish. There are biologists who are ichthyologists. That's what they do. They study fish. The two groups of fish that we've just talked about, there are very few of them around here, right? There's a species or two of lamprey in the Flint River.
I didn't think about that.
I don't think there's any of these guys, the chondrichthyes in the Flint.
No sharks.
No sharks. The next group of fish is the main group of fish, but the most recently evolved one, not bull sharks. The next group is osteichthyes.
Are they still under now?
Yes. Osteichthyes means bony fish. Fish have skeletons made out of bones, obviously. They are the most abundant vertebrates on Earth. There's more fish than all the vertebrates. Their skeleton is made of something pretty much like yours, which is calcium carbonate, better known to most people as limestone or chalk. Essentially, your skeleton is made of chalk. There's two. Yep.
So,
There's some other stuff in there.
theoretically,
Mostly calcium carbonate.
if I had a finger bone, I could ride on a chalk.
Well, like I said, there's some other stuff in there, but it's a little harder.
Theoretically.
But yeah.
Try taking out a couple of your phones.
They too.
If I were to break
Look, we want to finish this, guys. They too have this lateral line going down the midline of the body that acts like an ear and also a vibration sensor. Something that a big advancement of bony fish over cartilaginous fish is their gills are covered up with this little flap called the operculum. And they can move that, which means to keep water moving over their gills, they flap the operculum instead of having to what? Swim all the time.
So
Most sharks have to swim all the time in order to breathe. There's some exceptions, but most of them do. Bony fish don't. They can float, flap this operculum and still breathe. That's a good way to save energy. It's important. I don't know. Another big advantage of bony fish is they have a swim bladder, which is essentially like an internal float. They can put air into or let air out of. And that allows them to float without having to swim. It's another way to save energy. When you think about swimming all the time, that would be pretty tiring. So they can float without swimming. Most fish would not work too well on land. One reason is that they have external fertilization, which means the females lay their eggs. They're just soft, like gooey eggs. They lay those on usually the bottom of the body water, and then the males come by and essentially bomb them with sperm.
Nice.
Essentially how it works, external fertilization.
Classy.
Yeah. So sometimes we say fish are oviparous. Anytime you see OVI, what does that mean? It means eggs. So they lay eggs outside the body, oviparous. So birds are oviparous, fish are oviparous, amphibians are oviparous, for the most part. Are there mammals that are oviparous? Couple, platypus and the echidna, little spiny anteater. But other than that, most mammals are not oviparous. We'll get to that in a minute. These are class Osteichthyes. Again, a couple more things about fish. They're ectothermic, which means what? Yeah, body temperature is dependent on the outside environment. What's the advantage of being ectothermic?
You don't have to waste a ton of energy on regulating.
You don't have to eat a lot because you're not using energy to make what? Body heat. So that's an advantage. The disadvantage is what?
You can't like live in cold warm places.
Right. You can't live in really hot places. You can't live in really cold places because your body temperature will become too hot or too cold. So there's a trade-off.
Do they feel like hot and cold, or do they just feel like they're slowing down? So,
I'm sure they have some kind of hot and cold sensors, but how detailed they are, I can't tell you. I'm not sure, but I'm sure they do feel hot and cold. How they experience it, though, I don't know.
yeah, because how do you live in a lake like undersea ice?
Right. Right. It can't be very comfortable. There are a few sharks, by the way, that are ovoviviparous. Now, that's kind of weird. Ovoviviparous. What does V-I-V mean?
Life.
It means life. Humans are viviparous. Take this off the front. Take the ovo part off. Viviparous means give birth to live young. No eggs laid outside the body. The way it works in sharks, some sharks are oviparous. They lay the eggs and all that happens outside. But there are several species of sharks where the mother keeps the eggs inside her body until they hatch. Out come the babies, and out come the pieces of the eggs about the same time.
Don't they have to like eat each other?
Some do. There's also a few species of snakes that are ovoviviparous, that they'll keep the eggs in the body to protect them. They'll hatch in the body, out come the babies, out come the eggs.
The shell's like soft.
Softer than most normal eggs, but not completely soft, no.
Like what kind of snake?
The garter snake around here. There's several snakes. The garter snake's the one that always comes up.
I saw a snake the other day.
Fish, by the way, have two chambered hearts. Back on track. What are the top chambers in your heart? Atria. So they just have one atrium and one ventricle. And in general, what's the atrium doing?
It's pulling blood.
Yeah, it's just like a receiving chamber. And then the ventricle is the what? It's the pump. So this receives, this pumps. That's generally how it works. Fish only have two. Not so bad in a fish, and we'll talk about why, but if you only had two, it'd be a bad thing. Yeah, well, there's more to it than that, too,
A lot
though.
more cell respiration.
Here's a bony fish. See the gills? Remember, it's covered by that operculum, which will make the water flow over it. This is the swim bladder right here. It's like a big balloon inside. Helps them float. You can obviously see the vertebrae. So it's got bony backbone. The lateral line, you can't really see it too well here, but there's a little line that runs right down the middle. And that's like their ear, the vibration sensor.
Do you smell in there?
How do you what?
Do you smell?
Smell is a different, I mean, I don't know that they smell the same way we smell, but they pick up chemicals. It's a chemical sensing. That'd be a better way to say it.
Oh my gosh.
And this guy here, this is a fish that they had fossils of for many years. What do they think about this guy though? They thought they were extinct. It's called coelacanth. It's what we call lobe fin fish. And I don't know, in the 70s maybe, somebody caught one. Scientists were saying they've been extinct for thousands of years, and then somebody catches one. And they find out that, lo and behold, there's a lot of them down there, like off Madagascar, I think, is what they call this one. They think that these guys are the ancestors of amphibians. So they think that fish their ancestors evolved into amphibians, is the idea. Yep. So this is the idea. So here's a fish, a low-fin fish like a coelacanth. And if you look at the arrangement of the bones in the legs, or in the fins rather, they're very similar to the arrangement of bones in like a amphibian leg. They think that these guys evolved into the amphibians. That being said, amphibians are the first land animals. And their big advancements, their big derived characteristics, number one, are probably limbs. We might also add here lungs. So there are a couple of fish, remember, that have lungs. Not many. We might put lungs here too.
These are steamer fruits.
They do, and we're getting there. We'll have another set of slides here. Let me get back to my amphibian slides. So amphibians are things like what?
Salamanders.
Frogs and salamanders, newts, which are very similar to salamanders,
Not turtles.
toads, not turtles. There's also this legless amphibian called a Sicilian. It looks like a snake, but it's an amphibian for these reasons. Amphibians are ectothermic. They're cold-blooded. Their body temperature is completely dependent on the temperature outside. Like I said, big derived characteristic which made them pretty good at living on land is the development of limbs. They have lungs, but they don't work very well. They're very poorly developed, which means that most amphibians have to supplement lung breathing with what? Skin breathing. And what I hope you remember from when we talked about diffusion and osmosis, for gases to be able to cross through something, what has to be true of that thing they're crossing? Not necessarily. It has to be thin and moist. And what that means is that amphibian skin has to be really thin and wet all the time. And that's one of the reasons why you find them almost always near water, is that they have to stay wet and moist so that they can breathe. Their heart has 3 chambers in it, so one more chamber than the fish, and we'll talk about why that's important in a second. We already said that their thin skin has to remain moist so they can breathe through it. They also have to reproduce in the water because they have external fertilization. What does a frog egg look like? A little jelly-like thing. And the way reproduction works in the frog is that they're in like the edge of the water. The male jumps on the back of the female's back and pushes on her with his little hands. And what's he pushing out? He's pushing out the eggs. And as they come out, he essentially bombs them with burn. That all happens outside the body. Okay? It's all external. That wouldn't work on the land because things would dry out real fast, right? He pushes them out and then sprays them. So amphibians are oviparous. They lay eggs outside the body. Oviparous. But they lay them in the water. So that's another thing that ties them to water. That's another reason amphibians live on land, but they're not so good at it. They have to have thin, wet skin to breathe. They have to have sex in the water because everything's external. And their babies have to develop in the water because their eggs are kind of gooey. And what other thing ties them to the water? Their larvae are essentially what? Fish, right? Their larvae are amphibians. They're essentially like fish. They breathe with gills. So that ties them to water too. So here's some frogs and salamanders. Here's the Sicilian, the legless amphibian. I think most of those live in Mexico. It looks a lot like a snake. Now here's some things about the heart. Here's fish heart. Only 2 chambers. 1 atrium, 1 ventricle. So blood goes. What's happening right here? Well, this is the gills. So the blood's coming in. Why is it blue here? Doesn't have much oxygen. Hits the gills. That's where it gets oxygenated. Goes to the body. Here's where it's at the body. It's just different parts of the body. It could be the tail, wherever. Oxygen's coming out, being used. And it goes back to the heart and just keeps cycling. That works okay in a fish. In an amphibian, you've got 3 chambers. And amphibians' hearts are another thing that hold them back. Because notice, this is blue. You may not be able to see it so well. What color's coming out of the ventricle? Purple. And then this is red here, so this is the lungs. So the blood comes out of the ventricle, and it goes out either to the body or to the lungs. Let's say it goes out to the lungs. And here it gets oxygenated. So it comes back to the heart red. But there's two atria, and one ventricle. So when these two atria dump into the ventricle, what happens? The oxygenated blood gets mixed with the deoxygenated blood, which means they pump out blood to the body that's like half oxygenated and half not, which means their cells don't get a whole lot of oxygen, which means they can't do too much what? So respiration. So they can't be, you ever seen a huge amphibian?
No.
They don't exist because their heart can't, and their lungs don't provide enough oxygen for them to be able to do enough cell respiration to be big and active. So they're small. The biggest frog I've ever seen, and I haven't seen one in person, but there's some frogs about that big. I promise, they're huge. They live in South American rainforest. Can't tell you what the name of them is right off the top of my head, but there's some big frogs, but no bigger than no, definitely smaller than that bag. It's about as bigger as they get, about half that bag. On the other side of things, they're big. On the other side of things, birds and mammals have 4 chambers. And the advantage of having 4 chambers is you have one side of the body that's just dealing with what? One side of the heart, rather, that's just dealing with what? Deoxygenated. And you got one side that's dealing with oxygenated. So that way, when you're pumping out what's supposed to be oxygenated to your tissues, it is oxygenated, right? And your tissues get more and more oxygen. You can be bigger, more active, there's no mixing. So that's birds and mammals. This is amphibians and reptiles. That's fish. So let's deal with reptiles. And I don't know if we'll get to birds and mammals today or not. Notice the characteristic here, amnion. Anybody know what that is? That's a membrane that surrounds a developing baby. And essentially, what's inside the amnion? Fluid. So we think that all the vertebrates came from water-dwelling things, right? So this is a way to still be a water-dwelling thing, but develop where? On the land. So it's a way to bring the water with you. The amniotic sac.
There's no liquid inside of the amphibious eggs? Or it just like it has to be in water?
They can't keep it inside. Okay? This reptile eggs are hard shelled, right? So water can't go in and out. Water stays in.
Can we breathe that?
Do we?
Amniotic fluid?
Do we breathe it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because. Yeah, short answer. Yes.
I thought oxygen was provided through the umbilical.
Well, in us it is, but some of that goes into the fluid. But most of it happens between the blood vessels of the placenta. So you got baby blood vessels and mama blood vessels. And in an embryo, most of the oxygen goes from mama blood vessels into baby blood vessels. That's what the placenta is all about. It's a connection between mama's blood system and baby's blood system. Yeah.
Okay, so why do babies have to develop in fluid? Why can't they just like develop like outside of water?
Well, at least at first you don't have any skin, so you dry out. Later on, I guess that's just the way it's happened in the past. But at first, things would dry up real fast because there's no barrier. All right, class Reptilia, reptiles. So these are everything from snakes to lizards to alligators to Komodo dragons to turtles to what used to be dinosaurs. Reptiles are ectothermic, cold-blooded. And that's why if you went to South Pole, do you expect to find any reptiles? No. If you go to a desert, you might find them, but you're probably only going to find them when? At night, when it's cooler, when it's shady. That's some advantages they have over amphibians that make them pretty good at living on land. They have internal fertilization. They have essentially the same reproductive parts that we have. So that keeps the eggs and the sperm from drying out because everything stays in the body. They have this hard-shelled egg called the amniotic egg, which maintains a water system inside there. We'll look at the amniotic egg in a minute. But this is a hard-shelled egg, like birds and reptiles have. Even though their heart's only 3 chambers, there's a wall in that bottom ventricle that almost divides it into 4 chambers. Which means there's less weight than what you might have in an amphibian. There's less mixing. So they're pumping out more oxygen to their tissues than amphibians are. Which means they can be bigger, they can be more active. Their skin is much more thick, much thicker, much more water resistant, because what works much better in them than in amphibians? Their lungs. Their lungs work way better than amphibian lungs. And like I said earlier, most all the reptiles are oviparous, which means they lay eggs outside the body and they hatch. There are a few, like the garter snake around here, that maintain the eggs in the body, hatch them in the body, and then out come the baby and out come the pieces of the egg. But that's rare, just a few species. Remember, again, one of their big advantages over amphibians, well-developed respiratory system, a thick skin, and that egg, plus the internal fertilization. So they got several things that make them better at living on land than amphibians are. There we see just a couple of examples, some sea turtles, Gila monster, some kind of lizard there at the bottom. Now, here's an amniotic egg. Let's talk about it. So on the outside, you got that hard shell. On the inside, you've got 3 or 4 really important structures. One structure is this little bag-like thing right here, and that's called the yolk sac. What's that about?
It holds you.
It holds the yolk just right. It's food. Food for the baby. So this is the food source. You got the amnion, which on here is hard to, this projector screen is not doing what it ought to be doing. See if I can see it better here. The amnion essentially encircles the baby here, and it's basically like a container for water. Then you've got this little bag over in here called the allantois, or allantois, some people say. That's where they store what? Waste. It's like a waste container. So things like uric acid, which is a waste product of what? It's part of urine. It's their from eating like proteins, right? From breaking down proteins. And then you've got a chorion, which circles the whole thing in and helps do gas exchange and keep in water and that kind of stuff. That's all inside the egg. But that's essentially the same egg that a bird has. Reptile eggs, bird eggs, very, very similar. Both amniotic, built-in supply of food and water. Cool thing about, not sure about crocodiles, but alligators. What determines the sex of alligator babies? Yeah, they don't have X and Y chromosomes like we do. Their sex is determined by the temperature the eggs are incubated at.
I think it's crocodiles.
It's probably just crocodiles. But one way they make that happen is they bury the eggs in a big mound, and some of the eggs they bury deeper than others, so that you get part girls and part boys. It's just a degree or 2 difference that makes it happen that way. All right, so let's go ahead and mention birds. Notice the big thing there, feathers. Big derived, but there's a lot of other things too that are important.
Flying.
So, class AVs, those are the birds. And things in class AVs, one of their big characteristics, endothermic. And that means warm-blooded, right? Controlling your own body temperature. We said the advantage of that is that you can live anywhere. You can control your own temperature. The disadvantage is you better have what? You better have plenty of food. Because you have to burn energy constantly. Like mammals, birds have a 4-chambered heart, which helps to separate oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Their bones are mostly hollowed out, which is a way to get rid of extra weight, right? If you're going to fly, you better be light. Now, also, a lot of, you might not notice, a lot of the organs that we have two of,
Mhm.
like kidneys, they don't have one of them.
There's no
To lose light, to lose weight, keep them lighter. Obviously, they have wings. Their lungs actually work better than mammal lungs. It takes a lot of energy to fly, right? So you better have a good way to get oxygen and transport oxygen. Again, like the reptiles, they have amniotic eggs, and most all of them are oviparous, lay eggs outside the body. And most people think the birds came from where?
Dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs. That essentially that dinosaurs didn't really go extinct. They just, their ancestors became birds. And I mean, if you think if you defeathered birds, they sort of look like what we think of as dinosaurs, right? If you took the feathers off of them.
Does that mean dinosaurs have feathers?
No, that's not what we're saying. There are a few, like Archaeopteryx or something like that might have had feathers, but not many. Here's that cloaca we were talking about, which is the cavity that the intestines and the urinary system and the reproductive system all dump into before it all comes out. Notice they have most of the same organs that we have. You see the kidneys, the pancreas, the heart. Now they have a couple things we don't have, like a gizzard.
What is that?
A gizzard is it's this chamber. Usually birds will eat little pebbles, little rocks, and those pebbles get caught in their gizzard. Most birds don't have teeth, right? So the food goes into the gizzard and they wiggle it, and it crushes the food. It's like internal heat, and they use rocks to crush up their food in the gizzard. They're pretty cool. Several things to do.
People eat those.
Yeah.
People eat those?
Some people do.
Yeah, we sell them at food value.
Yeah. Some people eat gizzards. Chicken gizzards. Yeah, some people do use them for bait.
You can go to Kroger.
But some people eat them.
You can go to Kroger and get a styrofoam box with the shrink wrap on it, and it's got chicken gizzards and hearts.
Yummy.
We sell pig feet, pig ears, pig brains, pig